Some feuds run deeper than others, but for these 10 UFC rivalries, the fighters involved certainly managed to get it all out of their system when the cage doors closed. Here are 10 UFC grudge matches that did settle the beef. Alexander Volkanovski vs. Brian Ortega. Alexander Volkanovski and Brian Ortega spent enough time opposite one another in the Ultimate Fighter house to know that they weren't going to get along. And sure enough, when their fight was eventually signed, the personality clash did not let up. By the time fight week came, these two just could not wait to get their hands on each other. Against all odds, Ortega very nearly managed to pull off a major upset, coming close with 2 submissions in round 3 that would have forced the tap out of 99% of fighters. But Volkanovski proved himself to be a 1% kind of man, and post-fight in defeat, T-City couldn't help but voice his respect for the insane toughness of his rival. Khamzat Chimaev vs. Kevin Holland. These two guys were involved in a full-on brawl just hours before the cage doors closed. And despite Khamzat Chimaev's absolutely mauling Kevin Holland for a first-round finish, that short amount of time they spent together in the octagon certainly did the trick. These two outspoken characters were quick to bury the hatchet. And if we are being totally honest, we're guessing Kevin Holland got a real lesson about the levels that exist in the world of wrestling and grappling. Jens Pulver vs. BJ Penn. These two lightweight legends were at each other's throats for years, and eventually, their season of The Ultimate Fighter only saw things escalate to another level. As two pioneering icons of the 155-pound division, we knew that their rivalry was mainly competitive. But what we didn't anticipate was just how quickly everything would have dissolved after their second fight. Penn proved himself to be the more improved fighter on that night, winning by submission 5 years after their first bout. And with that, their heated rivalry was put to bed. Conor McGregor vs. Chad Mendes. Conor McGregor and Chad Mendes didn't have too much time to become sworn enemies, given that Chad filled in for the injured Jose Aldo on less than 2 weeks' notice. But in that time, they certainly sold a few extra tickets, that's for sure. Mendes never appreciated any of Conor's comments about his height and one-dimensional fighting style. And Conor? Well, Conor just likes making enemies. However, after their thrilling 2-round showdown, these men embraced each other with nothing but respect. That fight barely lasted 10 minutes. But in that time, they managed to learn a hell of a lot about the other. Michael Bisping vs. Luke Rockhold II. Okay, we'll admit that this beef didn't resolve immediately, but the total U-turn done by Bisping and Rockhold from their worst moment to the present day is pretty insane. Rockhold really just seemed to hate Bisping's guts, the way he disrespected him, and the way he always seemed to have the upper hand in the trash-talking exchanges. But Rockhold held a vital win over the count in their first fight. So when the time came to rematch, he was as confident as can be. Bisping, in one of the craziest moments in UFC history, somehow managed to score the upset, KOing the heavily favored champ in the first round. Sure, it took some time for them to work on their personal relationship, but these days, Bisping and Rockhold have actually trained together. How's that for coming full circle? If you're enjoying this content and want to see more videos like this, drop a comment and subscribe to our channel to never miss out on any of our upcoming videos. Anderson Silva vs. Chael Sonnen II. When the great Chael P. Sonnen tells you that you were the better man on fight night, you know it means something. This was without question one of the greatest rivalries in MMA history, and that first fight was among the most shocking showdowns we've ever seen. Chael might have lost when they originally collided, but he amped up his trash talk in a huge way coming into the rematch. Unfortunately, a failed spinning back fist attempt saw him trip and lose by TKO shortly after. But if you thought that Sonnen was about to make an excuse, think again. After going 0-2 against Silva, Chael was quite respectful, and to this day, these guys are on pretty good terms, as unlikely as that might have seemed at one point. Kamaru Usman vs. Colby Covington. Speaking of unlikely, how about the post-fight embrace shared by Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington after the rematch for the welterweight title? These guys went deep when it came to selling their first and second matchups, and by the time the bout actually came, it seems as though these two were ready to kill. But in a moment of rare transparency, Colby broke character after losing to Usman and told him that all the abuse and insults were for the cameras for the fight promotion. It was quite a shock to the system, if we're totally honest, but even still, we all know that these two will be back at each other's throats in no time if a third fight is ever set up. Nate Diaz versus Donald Cerrone. Having beef with Diaz brothers is rarely for show. These guys do not take kindly to fighters who think they can beat them. Yeah, it really is as simple as that. And for Nate Diaz and his old lightweight rival Donald Cerrone, their riveting showdown appeared to make Nate's superiority very clear on fight night. But it took years of mean mugging and general awareness post-fight for Cowboy to actually just go up to Nate and Nick and check that they were cool. As it turned out, they were, and they've been A-OK ever since. George St. Pierre versus Nick Diaz. Speaking of the Diaz brothers, it's kind of hilarious how angry Nick Diaz made the always calm George St. Pierre. Nick just has a way of pushing buttons, and throughout his entire second stint in the UFC, Diaz took shot after shot at George, accusing him of faking an injury to avoid fighting him. When their bout actually came, GSP was pissed, but still turned in a very confident and measured performance to see off Diaz on the cards. To the surprise of most of us, Nick was pretty chill post-fight, giving St. Pierre props for his technical skills. Although he would later claim that George was on peds, but hey, that's just Nick Diaz. Quinton Rampage Jackson versus Rashad Evans. And finally, we come to one of the all-time most entertaining rivalries. The one that gifted us with an unmissable season of The Ultimate Fighter. Even as they ruthlessly trash-talked one another, you couldn't help but get the sense that these two kind of liked each other on some level. Their fight, which was won by Rashad, wasn't even the most interesting or entertaining part of this rivalry. But these days, the two seem to have accepted that they make better friends than enemies. And to be honest, we're all happier for it. But what is your favorite MMA rivalry of all time? Do let us know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and remember to like the video, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our latest uploads.